Ever feel like some people hit the jackpot just by where they're born? Like
Uh,
life's on easy mode for them while others are stuck grinding away?
yeah.
Well, this year's Nobel Prize in Economics dives right into that, why some nations prosper, others not so much. And the answers are way more interesting than you might think.
It's not just some dry economic theory either. It's about, like, the very fabric of societies, how the world's been shaped over centuries.
Exactly. And these winners, Daron Acemoglu, Simon Johnson, and James A. Robinson, they uncovered this wild reversal of fortune thing. Get this. Places that were like economic powerhouses 500 years ago, they're struggling today.
Yeah.
But places that were practically unheard of back then, now they're top dog.
It's a fascinating paradox. Really challenges that old geography is destiny idea, like
Mhm.
tropical climates were somehow worse for success. Turns out is way more nuanced than that.
Okay, so give us an example. What's a real world reversal like this?
Picture yourself in Nogales, that city split right down the middle by the U.S.-Mexico border.
Okay, yeah.
Nogales, Arizona, on the U.S. side, it's thriving. Safe, good schools, tons of opportunity. But step over that border into Nogales, Sonora. Totally different story.
Wow.
Poverty, crime, the whole 9 yards. Same geography, climate, even families split across the line sometimes.
So what gives? If it's not just the land itself, what makes the difference?
This is where it gets juicy. These disparities, they were basically baked in centuries ago
Oh, wow.
during colonialism. But here's the catch rate. Colonizers didn't just, like, impose the same system everywhere.
Ah,
It
yeah.
depended on whether they were there to settle down or just exploit the place.
Okay, so different game plans for different parts of the world.
Exactly. North America, for example, temperate, not too many indigenous people, prime real estate for Europeans to settle. So they brought institutions that, while flawed, aimed to let more people prosper.
Yeah.
Property rights, limits on government, that kind of thing. It encouraged investment growth.
But places like South America, rich in resources, larger native populations, they got a different deal, huh?
Yeah, unfortunately. Those regions became about extraction, not building up society for everyone, but grabbing as much wealth as possible, as fast as possible.
Wow.
So they imposed institutions to benefit a small elite, often at the expense of everyone else.
So the things that made some places attractive their existing wealth, that might have actually hurt them in the long run.
That's a huge takeaway from this work. The richer you were pre-colonization, the more likely you were to get hit with these extractive institutions.
Hmm.
That just stifled growth long term. Like, it's set up to benefit the few, not the many. And that pattern, tough to break.
Okay, so we've said institutions a lot. But for our listener, what does that actually mean? What's the difference on the ground between these extractive places and the ones that got the good institutions? So it's like some countries got a rule book for a rigged game, huh?
Yeah, it's really about power, isn't it?
Hmm.
In these places with extractive institutions, a small group, like historically colonial powers or local elites,
Right.
basically they call the shots, set up the whole system to keep the wealth flowing their way.
So how does that actually look different? Like on the ground, what's the difference between these extractive places and the ones that got the quote unquote good institutions?
Well, the laureates call them inclusive institutions,
Yeah.
and it boils down to basically fairness.
Okay.
In these societies, it's not about who you know, it's what you can do. You're safe from someone just taking your stuff because they're powerful.
Ah, I see.
Your farm, your business.
Makes sense.
You're protected, so you're more likely to invest, to build, to try new things.
Yeah, you have skin in the game.
Exactly. Think of it like, would you bother planting a garden if anyone could just walk in and take your vegetables?
Huh, probably not.
Right. But if you've got property rights, laws that actually protect you, well, you're way more likely to put in the work.
It's about trusting the system. Yeah.
Exactly. Inclusive institutions, they level the playing field. More people have a shot at success based on, merit, not just connections.
And that leads to,
More prosperity overall, more stability in the long run.
okay, that all tracks. But then here's the million-dollar question. If these inclusive systems are so great, why don't the other countries just like hit reset, change the rules?
Ah, if only it were that easy.
Right.
This is where it gets really interesting. You see, it's not just about good guys and bad guys, or even about knowing that inclusive is better long term.
Hmm.
It's about human nature, that instinct to hold on to power, even when it's bad for everyone, ultimately even yourself.
So it's more than just changing the laws. It's changing what, like deeply ingrained behavior?
Exactly. The elites in power, the ones benefiting from the extractive systems, they've got a lot to lose if things change.
I bet.
Even if they get it intellectually, that a fairer system might be better overall. Giving
Yeah.
up their slice of the pie, that's tough to swallow.
It's like that saying, power corrupts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And on top of that, there's this commitment problem. Even if an elite promises to change, can you trust them?
So you're saying even if a leader is like, okay, we'll change things, there's still that doubt.
Totally. Think
Yeah.
of it like, imagine a king, right?
Mm.
And suddenly there's a peasant revolt,
Okay, yeah, getting a little dicey.
right? You might promise all kinds of stuff to calm everyone down. Maybe even like sign some fancy document. But once the threat's gone,
Back to the old ways.
exactly.
So if change is this hard and elites hold on so tight, is there any hope for countries stuck like that?
It's a big question. The laureates, they argue that change is possible,
Yeah.
but it's almost never easy or, peaceful.
Right.
Real lasting change, it usually comes from below.
Interesting.
But think about the French Revolution. Even when the king made concessions, people didn't trust him, didn't think it would last.
So sometimes it takes a real shakeup to get those in power to actually share control.
It's kind of unsettling, but yeah, history shows us that power. People don't just give that up willingly.
No kidding.
The laureates use the rise of democracy in Western Europe as a big example. It wasn't smooth at all.
I bet.
Messy, often violent, driven by like full-on revolutions, uprisings, that constant threat.
Of being overthrown, yeah.
Exactly. Those in power, they had to be convinced, or maybe more like forced, to see that holding on at any cost. Way riskier than sharing a little bit.
Fascinating how that works. Makes you look at what's going on today in a whole new light, you know?
It really does.
Yeah.
Think about all the protests, the movements we see now, demanding more freedom, economic and political.
Yeah, for sure.
It's all part of the same struggle. For power, for real commitments to reform, for institutions that actually work for the many, not just a few at the top.
It's kind of wild to think that no matter how much progress happens, that fight never really ends, huh?
It's true. And it brings us to like one last thought from the laureates' work. Even in places that seem to have it figured out, fair, prosperous, there's always that risk of backsliding.
Oh, really?
They call it captured democracy,
Right.
where a small group, usually wealthy, with their own interests, they
Yeah.
figure out how to influence the whole system.
So even if it seems like the good guys won, you got to keep fighting to make sure it stays fair.
Exactly. Constant tug of war. And it just shows how important it is to be, vigilant, active citizens, holding those in power accountable everywhere.
Wow. Food for thought. Well, there you have it, a deep dive into why some countries are rich and others poor, all based on the work of this year's Nobel Prize winners. And remember, this is just the start of the conversation. I highly encourage you to check out their work, dive into these ideas more, because understanding this stuff, it's not just about economics, it's about understanding how the world works, seeing the patterns throughout history, how dangerous unchecked power can be, and how important it is to build systems that are actually fair. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive, and until next time, keep those brain cells firing.